In the quiet moments before dawn, when shadow and light hang in perfect balance, the whispers of history echo from a narrow coastal pass in ancient Greece called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Here, nearly 2,500 years ago, unfolded one of history's most profound demonstrations of courage. Not the blind courage that comes from ignorance of danger, but the rarer, more sublime courage that faces certain death with open eyes and stands its ground nonetheless. The year is 480 BC. The Mediterranean cradles emerging civilizations that will form the bedrock of Western thought. Two forces collide in a confrontation that would forever alter the course of human history. On one side stands the mightiest empire the world has ever known, Persia, a colossus stretching from the Indus River to the shores of the Aegean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the cataracts of the Nile. Led by King Xerxes, son of Darius, grandson of Cyrus the Great, commanding an army so vast that legends claim it drank entire rivers dry as it marched. On the other side stand the Greeks, not yet a unified nation, but a fractious collection of city-states, often warring amongst themselves, different in dialect, in government, in temperament, yet united by language, by gods, and now by a common threat. At the forefront of this unlikely alliance, 300 Spartan warriors, led by their king Leonidas, a man raised from birth to embody the warrior ideal. The odds seemed impossible. The Persian force numbered in the hundreds of thousands, the Greek defenders merely thousands. Yet in this imbalance lies the first lesson of Thermopylae, that mathematics alone cannot calculate the power of will, the strength of discipline, or the force of warriors fighting for their homes. What happened at this narrow pass between mountain and sea has echoed through time not merely as a military engagement, but as a fundamental human parable. It speaks to something elemental in humanity, the notion that some principles are worth dying for, that freedom requires sacrifice, that the few may sometimes stand against the many, and even in defeat, achieve an immortal victory. In this crucible of conflict, stunning courage and bitter betrayal unfolded. The limits of human endurance were tested and occasionally transcended. Men from different worlds, with different visions of how life should be lived, clashed not only with weapons of bronze and iron, but with fundamentally opposing ideas about the relationship between the individual and the state. Beyond the clash of spears and the thunder of thousands of feet marching toward destiny lay quieter, more intimate moments. A Spartan warrior's final night with his wife, a Persian commander's doubts, the weight of a king's decision when he realizes the battle is lost but chooses to remain. This is the story of Thermopylae, a tale of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, a testament to the heights of sacrifice humans will make for their beliefs and for each other. A moment when a tiny flame of resistance was kindled against the winds of conquest, a flame that, against all expectation, would not be extinguished. The story begins not with the battle itself, but with the gathering storm that made it inevitable, the collision course of two civilizations with vastly different visions of how the world should be ordered. To understand Thermopylae, one must first understand how Greece and Persia came to face each other across a narrow strip of blood-soaked earth in the shadow of the mountains. The seeds of the conflict at the Hot Gates were sown decades before the first Persian foot touched Greek soil. Behind this legendary confrontation lay the inexorable rise of an empire that redefined what political power could encompass. The Persian ascendancy began with Cyrus the Great, who inherited a minor kingdom in the 6th century BC, and through cunning diplomacy and strategic warfare, forged the largest empire the world had yet witnessed. Unlike many conquerors before him, Cyrus displayed remarkable tolerance toward the customs and religions of subjugated peoples. This policy of cultural respect became a hallmark of Persian governance, though beneath this veneer of benevolence lay an uncompromising demand for tribute and obedience. Under Cyrus and his successor, Cambyses II, Persian dominion expanded westward, eventually absorbing the Greek cities along the Ionian coast of Asia Minor. These Greeks, though now Persian subjects, maintained their distinct culture, trade networks, and restless spirit of independence. They formed an uneasy frontier between two worldviews: the Persian model of a vast, centralized empire ruled by divine authority, and the Greek experiment with smaller, self-governing city-states. Following palace intrigues and succession disputes, Darius I seized the Persian throne. A brilliant administrator, he reorganized the empire into satrapies, standardized taxation, and constructed the royal road, a vast highway system stretching nearly 2,000 miles, enabling imperial messengers to travel from Sardis to Susa in less than a week. Such innovations transformed Persia from a mere conquest state into a functioning imperial machine. Yet Darius harbored ambitions beyond administrative excellence. His gaze turned toward the fractious Greek peninsula across the Aegean. Persian spies infiltrated Greek cities, gathering intelligence on their militaries, their politics, and most importantly, their interminable rivalries. Reports flowed back to the great king. Athens and Sparta distrusted each other. Thebes had grievances against Athens. Argos resented Spartan dominance. Such divisions might be exploited when the time came. That opportunity arrived with the Ionian revolt. Led by Aristogoras of Miletus, the Greek cities of Asia Minor rose against Persian rule. They sought aid from mainland Greece. Sparta refused, but Athens, a rising democratic power, eager to demonstrate its commitment to Greek liberty, dispatched 20 ships. Eretria, a small polis on the island of Euboea, contributed 5 more. This intervention proved fateful. Though initially successful, the rebellion ultimately crumbled. Persian forces recaptured Miletus, executing some inhabitants and enslaving others. Darius, however, had not forgotten Athens' involvement. In his royal chambers, he instructed a servant to whisper in his ear 3 times daily, "Master, remember the Athenians." The great king soon launched his first punitive expedition against mainland Greece, led by his son-in-law Mardonius. Fate intervened when a violent storm wrecked much of the Persian fleet near Mount Athos. Undeterred, Darius prepared a second, larger force. His heralds traveled throughout Greece demanding earth and water, symbolic tokens of submission. Many smaller city-states complied, but Athens and Sparta not only refused, but executed the messengers, a shocking violation of diplomatic custom that made conflict inevitable. The following summer, a Persian armada landed at Marathon, a coastal plain 26 miles from Athens. What followed entered the realm of legend. Against overwhelming odds, the Athenian hoplites charged across the plain and achieved a stunning victory. A messenger ran the full 26 miles to Athens, gasped news of the triumph, and collapsed dead, bequeathing to posterity the Marathon race. Marathon shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. Yet to Darius, this setback merely postponed the inevitable. He began assembling a force so vast it would overwhelm any Greek resistance. Death interrupted his plans, leaving the task to his son, Xerxes. Unlike his politically shrewd father, Xerxes approached governance with religious zeal. He viewed himself not merely as king, but as the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism. Failure to subdue Greece would constitute not just military defeat, but divine disgrace. Over the span of 4 years, Xerxes prepared on a scale that dwarfed all previous military undertakings. Storehouses bulged with grain at strategic points along the invasion route. Workers dug a canal through the Mount Athos Peninsula to avoid the treacherous waters that had wrecked Mardonius's fleet. Most ambitiously, engineers constructed 2 pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe, each nearly a mile long and consisting of hundreds of ships lashed together with flax and papyrus cables. When a storm destroyed these bridges, Xerxes, according to Herodotus, had the sea itself whipped 300 times and shackles thrown into the water, a symbolic punishment for its insolence. Though likely apocryphal, the tale captures Xerxes' imperial mindset. Even nature must bend to Persian will. Throughout this period of preparation, Persian informants in Greece provided intelligence on the political climate. The news heartened Xerxes. The Greek city-states remained divided, with many willing to submit rather than face annihilation. Moreover, the Persians had cultivated alliances with influential Greek families, who saw Persian overlordship as preferable to domination by rival Greek cities. Among these collaborators was Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king who now advised Xerxes. When the great king questioned him about his former countrymen, Demaratus offered a warning that would prove prophetic. The Spartans will fight even if they are fewer than their enemies, for they fear their law more than your subjects fear you. Xerxes dismissed such cautions. By the time winter gave way to spring, he had assembled a host that, according to Herodotus, numbered 2.6 million military personnel, plus an equal number of support staff. Modern scholars consider these figures wildly exaggerated, estimating the actual force between 100,000 and 300,000. Still, an overwhelming number by ancient standards. The invasion force comprised not just Persians, but contingents from every corner of the empire. Egyptians, Assyrians, Indians, Scythians, Ethiopians, and dozens more. Some rode horses, others camels. Some wielded bows, others javelins. Some wore elaborate armor, others fought nearly naked. This diversity, while impressive, created logistical challenges. Different languages, fighting styles, and equipment requirements complicated command and control. As this kaleidoscopic army began its westward march, Greek scouts watching from hidden vantage points returned to their cities with alarming reports. The Persian advance churned up dust clouds visible for miles. At night, their campfires speckled the landscape like fallen stars. When they drank, streams ran dry. When they ate, villages were stripped of food. Meanwhile, across the Aegean, the Greek response remained uncertain and divided. Old rivalries festered. Athens, with its powerful navy, advocated a maritime strategy. Sparta, supreme on land, favored defensive positions on the Isthmus of Corinth. Smaller cities hesitated, calculating whether resistance or submission offered better odds of survival. In this atmosphere of dread and indecision, a congress was hastily convened at Corinth. Representatives from 31 city-states formed a defensive alliance, swearing a solemn oath to fight together and, should they prevail, to punish any Greeks who had medized, sided with the Persians without coercion. Yet even this alliance represented only a fraction of the hundreds of Greek polis. Argos, nursing ancient grudges against Sparta, remained neutral. Thebes would eventually side with Xerxes. The oracle at Delphi itself, spiritual center of the Greek world, initially counseled submission, predicting calamity for those who resisted. As winter yielded to spring and spring to summer, the Persian juggernaut crossed into Europe. The stage was set for a confrontation between opposing civilizations and incompatible visions of human society. The storm had gathered. Now it would break upon the narrow coastal pass, where mountains met sea, and where a small force of Greeks prepared to make their stand. News of the Persian advance spread throughout Greece like wildfire, igniting both terror and resolve. In Athens, the assembly gathered in the shadow of the Acropolis to debate their response. The Spartans convened their council of elders beneath the open sky. In market squares and temples across Hellas, citizens asked the same question. How could a divided collection of city-states resist the greatest empire on earth? The challenge facing the Greeks was not merely military, but existential. Victory required that they overcome centuries of mutual suspicion. Athens and Aegina had feuded for generations over trade routes. Sparta and Argos nursed border disputes dating back beyond living memory. Thebes and Plataea shared a frontier, but little goodwill. These ancient rivalries had shaped Greek identity. Each city prided itself on its distinctiveness from its neighbors. Yet now, survival demanded cooperation. In the autumn prior to Xerxes' crossing, envoys from the most powerful polis converged on the sanctuary of Poseidon at the Isthmus of Corinth. Here, under the auspices of religion, they formed what history would remember as the Hellenic League, though contemporary Greeks simply called it the Alliance. Themistocles of Athens dominated these proceedings. Once ostracized by his fellow citizens, he had risen to prominence after correctly interpreting a Delphic prophecy before Marathon, urging Athens to place its faith in wooden walls. Now, with characteristic foresight, he argued that Greece must meet the Persian threat before it penetrated deep into their territory. If we await Xerxes at the Isthmus, he cautioned, we surrender northern Greece without a fight. The Thebans and others will join him, not from cowardice, but from necessity. Each city that falls makes the next more vulnerable. Opposing him stood delegates from the Peloponnesian cities, led by Sparta. Their perspective was shaped by geography. The narrow isthmus of Corinth formed a natural defensive position, protecting their peninsula. Why risk forces farther north when they could make a final stand on favorable terrain? These deliberations revealed a fundamental strategic dilemma. The Spartans excelled in land warfare, but possessed a minimal navy. The Athenians commanded the most powerful fleet in Greece, but could not match Spartan hoplites in pitched battle. Any effective response would require both elements, yet neither city fully trusted the other with command. Into this tense atmosphere came disturbing news from Delphi. Emissaries sent to consult Apollo's oracle returned with prophecies of doom. When the Athenians asked how they might survive the coming onslaught, the Pythia's first response chilled their blood. Fly, wretched people, to the ends of the earth, for fire and swift Ares, driving a Syrian chariot, will bring your city low. Refusing to accept this verdict, the Athenian delegates refused to leave the sanctuary, pleading for a more favorable prophecy. The oracle's second message offered a cryptic glimmer of hope. Zeus grants to Athena's wooden wall alone to remain unravaged. That shall help you and your children. Divine Salamis, you will bring death to women's sons. Interpreting these ambiguous verses became a matter of fierce debate. Some elderly Athenians believed the wooden wall referred to an ancient thorn hedge that once surrounded the Acropolis. Themistocles, however, insisted it signified the Athenian navy. The reference to Salamis, he argued, foretold a naval victory, though the oracle's mention of death to women's sons left uncertain which side would suffer the losses. Meanwhile, Sparta received its own prophecy, equally ambiguous but more personal. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta's spacious realm. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus's sons, or, if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles. This oracle presented King Leonidas with a stark choice. Either Sparta would fall, or he himself would perish. As a descendant of Heracles in the Aegeid line, he recognized his own fate woven into the prophecy. The religious dimension of these deliberations cannot be overstated. Before any major undertaking, Greeks consulted the gods through oracles, sacrificial omens, and the interpretation of natural phenomena. The Delphic pronouncements, while dire, provided a sacred framework for the decisions to come. As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, intelligence reports grew more alarming. Persian scouts were seen along the northern borders. Supply depots had been established throughout Thrace and Macedonia. The bridges across the Hellespont stood ready. Under this mounting pressure, the alliance reached a compromise strategy. They would contest the Persian advance at 2 points simultaneously: at the hot gates, where mountains met the sea in a narrow coastal pass, and at nearby Artemisium, where the Greek fleet could engage the Persian navy in the narrow strait between Euboea and the mainland. This plan married geographical advantage with strategic necessity. The coastal pass, named for its natural sulfur springs, created a bottleneck where Persian numerical superiority would be neutralized. A small force could theoretically hold the narrow defile, while the main Greek army assembled farther south. Meanwhile, at Artemisium, the confined waters would prevent the Persian fleet from using its superior numbers to surround the Greek ships. The strategic logic was sound, but the execution remained problematic. Sparta, despite agreeing to the plan, explained they could not immediately commit their full force. The approaching festival of Carnea prohibited military action, a religious restriction the Spartans, famous for their piety, would not violate. Moreover, the Olympic Games were imminent. An ancient tradition demanded a sacred truce during this pan-Hellenic celebration. These religious observances, critics later suggested, provided convenient excuses for hesitation. Yet such skepticism underestimates how deeply faith was woven into Greek life. To the Spartans, divine law transcended human urgency. Breaking sacred prohibitions might offend the gods upon whose favor victory ultimately depended. As a compromise, Leonidas elected to depart immediately, with just his personal bodyguard of 300 men, reinforced by perioikoi, free non-citizens, and helots, state-owned serfs. The main Spartan army would follow after the conclusion of the religious festivals. Throughout the allied cities, priests and seers conducted elaborate ceremonies seeking divine favor. In Athens, farmers abandoned their fields to help crew the ships. In Sparta, mothers bid stoic farewells to sons, famously instructing them to return with your shield or on it, victorious or dead, but never in retreat. The coordination between the land and naval forces required precise timing. Eurybiades, a Spartan commander, despite his city's limited naval tradition, received overall command of the fleet. This arrangement satisfied Spartan pride, while acknowledging that most ships came from Athens and other maritime states. Themistocles, commanding the Athenian contingent, exerted influence through persuasion rather than formal authority. As the Greek forces made their way toward the designated positions, reconnaissance parties brought back detailed information about the terrain. The mountain pass featured not merely one defensible position, but several. The primary choke point, the middle gate, narrowed to a passage barely wide enough for a single wagon. The Phocians, who knew the area intimately, revealed the existence of a mountain path that, if left unguarded, could allow the Persians to outflank the defenders. Leonidas noted this vulnerability and assigned Phocian troops to monitor the trail. Meanwhile, religious rituals continued to shape Greek preparations. Before embarking for the battleground, Leonidas consulted the Delphic oracle personally. Understanding the prophecy about a king of Heracles' line, he recognized that this expedition might claim his life. When selecting his 300 Spartans, he chose only men who had living sons, ensuring their bloodlines would continue regardless of the battle's outcome. On the eve of departure, Sparta held solemn sacrifices. As Leonidas prepared to lead his men northward, his wife Gorgo asked what she should do in his absence. His reply distilled Spartan values into a single command: marry a good man and bear strong children. This exchange, whether historical or apocryphal, captures an essential truth about Greek resistance. They fought not merely for immediate survival, but for a way of life they believed worth preserving, one that valued freedom, self-governance, and the right of each city to determine its own destiny. As the Persian colossus continued its inexorable advance southward, the fragile Greek alliance steeled itself for the coming test. At the mountain gateway and Artemisium, they would soon discover whether their strategy, courage, and divine favor could withstand the overwhelming force gathered against them. The first true clash of East and West was about to begin. To understand the stand at the hot gates, one must first understand Sparta and the extraordinary man who led its warriors to that fateful pass. Unlike Athens, with its philosophical discourse and artistic achievements, Sparta organized its entire society around a single purpose: creating the perfect warrior. This militaristic focus transformed the small polis into the most feared land power in the Greek world. The Spartan system began at birth. Elders examined every newborn, and those deemed weak or deformed faced abandonment on the slopes of Mount Taygetus. By age 7, boys left their homes for the agoge, a brutal training regimen that would consume the next 13 years of their lives. They slept on reed mats, went barefoot in all seasons, and received deliberately insufficient food to encourage stealth and cunning through theft. Though punishment was severe if caught, physical hardship formed only part of their education. Young Spartans learned to read and write, not for cultural enrichment, but for military necessity. They studied the poems of Tertius, which glorified dying in battle rather than retreating. Most distinctively, they developed the famed laconic wit, the ability to express complex thoughts with minimal words, a trait so characteristic that our modern term laconic derives from Lacedaemon, Sparta's formal name. Training emphasized group cohesion rather than individual prowess. The phalanx, Sparta's signature battle formation, functioned effectively only when each warrior subordinated personal glory to collective success. This mindset produced soldiers who, unlike other Greeks, did not break formation to pursue fleeing enemies or loot the fallen. They maintained discipline until victory was complete. Into this tradition stepped Leonidas, a prince not originally destined for kingship. Born around 540 BC to King Anaxandridas II and his second wife, Leonidas had 2 older half-brothers from his father's first marriage and 1 full brother, Cleombrotus. As the third son, he experienced the full rigors of the agoge, unlike the firstborn who, as heir apparent, received special treatment. This complete immersion in Spartan military life forged a commander intimately familiar with the training, capabilities, and mindset of those he would eventually lead. Fate intervened when his half-brother, King Cleomenes Theubrons, died without male heirs around 490 BC. The succession passed to Leonidas, who had married Cleomenes' daughter Gorgo, a woman renowned for her intelligence and political acumen. By the time Xerxes threatened Greece, Leonidas had ruled for a decade, earning respect for both his military judgment and his adherence to traditional Spartan values. Unlike the flamboyant Persian monarch who styled himself divine, Leonidas embodied the Spartan ethos of restraint. He lived in a simple house, ate the same black broth as common soldiers, and submitted to the same civic restrictions. Though a king, he answered to Sparta's ephors, 5 annually elected officials who could check royal power, and shared rule with a co-king from the Eurypontid dynasty. This divided authority, while sometimes cumbersome, prevented the emergence of tyranny. When news arrived of Xerxes' advance, Leonidas confronted a decision unprecedented in Spartan history. Tradition dictated that the full Spartan army, some 8,000 elite hoplites, never deployed during religious festivals, yet waiting until after the Carneia would surrender the strategic mountain passage. Taking an advance force offered the only solution, but this required circumventing convention without explicitly violating sacred law. Here, Leonidas demonstrated the political acumen that complemented his military prowess. Rather than commanding the attendance of regular units, he personally selected 300 men from among the Spartiates, full citizens who had completed the agoge, established households, and participated in the communal messes called syssitia. But his selection followed a crucial criterion, often overlooked in popular retellings. Each chosen warrior had to have a living son. This requirement served multiple purposes. Practically, it ensured the continuation of Spartan bloodlines should the mission prove fatal. Symbolically, it acknowledged the likelihood of death without explicitly stating that the mission was suicidal. Most importantly, it fulfilled the prophecy that Sparta itself would be preserved only through the sacrifice of a king from the Heraclid line, Leonidas himself. Among those selected was Dienekes, whose laconic wit would become legendary. When told that Persian arrows would fly in such numbers that they would blot out the sun, he purportedly replied, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." The remark, preserved by Herodotus, encapsulates the Spartan combination of discipline, fatalism, and grim humor. Another chosen warrior, Aristodemus, would suffer an inflammation of the eyes en route to the battlefield. Leonidas ordered him to return to Sparta, a command that would later subject Aristodemus to accusations of cowardice after he alone survived. Such was the Spartan expectation. Return victorious or dead, but never without your comrades. Though the famous 300 dominates popular imagination, Leonidas did not march alone. His Spartans brought their helots, serfs owned by the state who served as attendants, carrying equipment and providing support. More significantly, the Spartan force joined with other Greek contingents, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, whose loyalty remained suspect, 1,000 Phocians, and troops from several other cities, bringing the total Greek force at the coastal defile to approximately 7,000 men. The diversity within this force presented both challenges and opportunities. Unlike the Spartans, who had trained together since childhood, many allied contingents had never fought side by side. They carried different weapons, followed different tactical doctrines, and spoke different dialects. The Spartans favored the dory, a thrusting spear approximately 8 feet long, and fought in a tight phalanx where each man's shield protected the warrior to his left. Other Greeks used varied equipment and less rigid formations. Leonidas's challenge lay in integrating these disparate elements into an effective fighting force. He stationed his troops strategically, placing the Phocians along the mountain path, where their local knowledge proved valuable. The Spartans would anchor the main defensive line at the narrowest point of the pass, where Persian numerical advantage would be neutralized. Other contingents would rotate into the front lines to rest the primary defenders. On the eve of their march northward, the 300 participated in funerary rites. Though they were still living, they competed in funeral games normally held to honor the dead, a ritual acknowledgement of their likely fate. Their women presented them with their shields, uttering the famous charge, "Come back with this or on it." As the small army departed, they moved not with the despair of men marching to death, but with the grim determination of warriors who had, since childhood, been taught that dying for Sparta represented life's highest achievement. In their bronze-armored ranks marched men like Alpheus and Maron, twin brothers whose courage would earn mention in Herodotus's history, Eurytus and Aristodemus, whose divergent choices would highlight questions of duty and honor, and the king himself, Leonidas, who understood that leadership in this desperate hour required not merely tactical skill, but personal example. This extraordinary force, a mixture of the Greek world's finest soldiers and ordinary men, transformed by extraordinary circumstances, now moved toward a narrow pass between mountain and sea. There they would confront not merely the largest army ever assembled, but a pivotal moment in the clash between East and West, between imperial domination and the embryonic concept of freedom that had taken root in the rocky soil of Greece. While Leonidas led his men toward the mountain pass, the Persian colossus continued its inexorable advance through the territories of northern Greece. Having crossed the Hellespont in early summer, Xerxes' host moved with the deliberate pace of a force too vast for haste. Supply ships sailed alongside the coast, keeping the army provisioned, a logistical achievement unprecedented in ancient warfare. The Persian advance represented not merely a military operation, but a mobile city. Each evening, slaves erected a vast pavilion for the great king, complete with golden vessels and luxurious furnishings. Around this royal center, concentric rings of encampments spread outward. First the elite immortals, then other Persian units, followed by allied contingents from across the empire. Behind these came a train of attendants, concubines, merchants, and camp followers that doubled the already enormous size of the force. Leading this procession, scouts and advance parties preceded the main body. These included Greek collaborators who knew the terrain and could communicate with local populations. Chief among these guides was Demaratus, the exiled Spartan king, who now advised Xerxes. Though considered a traitor by his countrymen, Demaratus provided invaluable insights into Greek tactics, politics, and morale. During a halt in Thrace, Xerxes summoned Demaratus to his pavilion. Herodotus recounts their exchange. "Tell me, Demaratus," the great king demanded from his golden throne, "will the Greeks raise their hands against me in battle?" The exiled Spartan weighed his response carefully before answering. "The Greeks are accustomed to poverty, but have acquired virtue through wisdom and strict law. By this virtue, Greece protects itself from both poverty and domination." When Xerxes laughed at the notion that Greeks would face his overwhelming numbers, Demaratus offered a specific warning about his former countrymen. "If only 1,000 Spartans should take the field, they will not retreat. They will either conquer or die." The great king dismissed these cautions, unable to comprehend a worldview so different from his own. In the Persian imperial model, subjects fought through fear of the lash or hope of reward. The concept of citizen soldiers fighting for their laws and liberty remained foreign to him. As the Persian host traversed northern Greece, environmental challenges mounted. Though summer had begun, unseasonal storms lashed the coastline. Near Mount Pelion, a violent tempest caught the Persian fleet at anchor, destroying hundreds of ships and drowning thousands of men. The Athenian generals, upon receiving this news, interpreted it as divine assistance, evidence that Boreas, the north wind, had intervened on behalf of his Greek descendants. Equally problematic were the logistical demands of moving such an enormous force. The Persian army consumed resources at a staggering rate. According to Herodotus, the rivers they drank from ran dry, except for the largest. Local communities found themselves stripped of food even after preparing for months. One account claims that entertaining the king and his entourage for a single meal cost 400 talents of silver, a sum that could support several thousand Athenian families for a year. These hardships did not deter Xerxes. When the raging sea destroyed his pontoon bridges at the Hellespont, he had ordered the water whipped as punishment. Now, as nature continued to challenge his advance, he displayed the same determination. Engineers bridged rivers, leveled hills, and cleared forests to smooth the army's path. When Mount Athos threatened the fleet with its treacherous currents, Persian laborers had spent 3 years digging a canal through the peninsula, rather than risk the passage, an engineering feat that many Greeks initially considered impossible. Not all resistance came from nature. As the Persians moved southward, they encountered increasing Greek harassment. Thessalian cavalry conducted raids against exposed flanks. Advanced ships from the Greek fleet probed Persian naval positions. Most troubling to Xerxes, several cities that had initially offered earth and water, tokens of submission, now wavered as the Greek alliance showed unexpected determination. To counter this resistance, Xerxes employed psychological warfare. He sent heralds to neutral cities displaying the might of his army, offering generous terms for immediate surrender while describing the brutal fate of those who resisted. This carrot and stick approach yielded results. Numerous smaller communities along the Persian path pledged allegiance, calculating that practical survival outweighed patriotic sacrifice. The Persian intelligence network functioned efficiently, providing information about Greek movements and intentions. Spies disguised as merchants infiltrated Greek cities, assessing defenses and political resolve. Informants within Greece, aristocrats who favored Persian overlordship or simply feared devastation, sent messages through established channels. By the time the Persian vanguard approached Thessaly, Xerxes possessed detailed knowledge of Greek deployments, including the force gathering at the Hot Gates. The Persian preparations for this confrontation revealed their tactical flexibility. While popular imagination portrays the Persian army as an undifferentiated mass, it actually comprised specialized units adapted to varied terrain and opponents. The elite immortals, so named because their numbers remained constant at 10,000, with immediate replacement of any casualties, combined excellent training with standardized equipment. Alongside these Persian heavy infantry marched Elamite archers, Bactrian cavalry, Egyptian marines, Scythian horse archers, and dozens of other distinct contingents. This diversity created coordination challenges, but allowed Xerxes to deploy appropriate forces for specific objectives. For the narrow coastal defile, he selected the Medes and Scythians for the initial assault, troops from the empire's central regions known for their absolute loyalty. Behind them, he positioned the Immortals as an elite reserve. As the Persians approached the final mountain ranges separating them from central Greece, Xerxes dispatched diplomatic envoys to the main Greek alliance. These messengers carried final terms: submit and receive the great king's mercy, or resist and face annihilation. To reinforce this message, The envoys recounted the fate of cities that had already defied Persian might. Inhabitants enslaved, leaders executed, buildings razed, and salt sown into fields. The Greek alliance, now committed to its strategy of defense at the mountain gateway and Artemisium, rejected these overtures. Legend claims that when Persian envoys reached Sparta demanding earth and water, the Spartans threw them into a well, saying, "Dig it out for yourselves." Though likely apocryphal, the story captures the defiant spirit that now animated Greek resistance. As the confrontation approached, weather continued to influence events. Violent summer storms battered the Persian fleet near Euboea, while heat waves alternated with unseasonable rains along the coastal road. Persian officers interpreted these phenomena according to their Zoroastrian beliefs, seeing the conflict between light and darkness, order and chaos, playing out in both the natural and human realms. By the time Persian scouts sighted the Malian Gulf and the narrow coastline leading to the fateful pass, Xerxes had already decided his approach. Rather than attempt a flanking maneuver through the difficult mountain terrain, he would use overwhelming force at the pass itself. If the Greeks sought to create a bottleneck, he would simply pour through so many men that eventually the point would break. The stage was now set for direct confrontation. At the hot gates, Greek and Persian visions of how humanity should be governed would clash in one of history's pivotal moments. The Persians brought overwhelming numbers, imperial discipline, and absolute obedience to divine kingship. The Greeks brought superior tactical position, cultural determination, and an emerging concept that would eventually be called freedom. Within days, the narrow pass would run red with the blood of both. Nature itself shaped the battlefield that would determine the fate of Greece. The hot gates, deriving its name from the natural sulfur springs that bubbled forth from the earth, filled the air with mineral-scented mist. These thermal waters had drawn travelers seeking healing for centuries, but now the narrow pass would witness bloodshed rather than restoration. The geography of this coastal defile presented a perfect defensive position through a rare convergence of natural features. To the north rose the steep slopes of Mount Calidramon, part of the larger Oita range, a nearly impassable wall of limestone cliffs and dense forest. To the south stretched the Malian Gulf, its shoreline in 480 BC lying much closer to the mountains than it does today. Between these barriers, a coastal road threaded through three narrow points, or gates. The western gate, furthest from the Persian approach, measured approximately 50 feet wide. The eastern gate provided a similar width, but it was the middle gate, the central choke point, that offered the most strategic value, narrowing to a passage barely wider than a wagon. Here, the Greek defenders concentrated their forces, for this constriction neutralized the Persians' greatest advantage, their overwhelming numbers. Beyond these natural features, the battlefield contained significant human modifications. Years earlier, the local Phocians had constructed a defensive wall near the middle gate to protect against raids from their northern neighbors. Though partially ruined by the time Leonidas arrived, this structure provided a foundation for Greek fortifications. Under Spartan direction, the Allies rebuilt and strengthened the wall using local limestone, creating a barrier approximately 6 feet high. The environmental conditions at the mountain passage influenced battlefield dynamics in ways often overlooked. The sulfur springs created persistent mist, especially in morning hours, limiting visibility. The narrow corridor between mountain and sea channeled winds, sometimes strong enough to affect missile trajectories. Most significantly, the constrained space prevented the deployment of cavalry, neutralizing another Persian advantage. Water sources proved crucial for both armies. While the Greeks had access to several freshwater springs near their position, the massive Persian host struggled with supply issues. The few streams in the area could not support such numbers, requiring elaborate water transport from distant sources, another logistical burden for Xerxes' forces. When Leonidas and his advance force arrived at this strategic location, they immediately recognized its defensive potential. The Spartan king deployed his men with careful attention to both tactics and psychology. The rebuilt wall anchored their position, with the seasoned Spartans holding the front lines at the narrowest point. Other Greek contingents positioned themselves in supporting formations, ready to rotate forward as needed. The Phocian troops, approximately 1,000 strong and familiar with the local terrain, received a special assignment. Leonidas stationed them along the mountain path, the Thermopylae trail, that circumvented the main pass. This route, little more than a shepherd's track winding through forests and ravines, represented a potential vulnerability if the Persians discovered it. The Phocians' knowledge of every twist and overlook made them ideal sentries for this critical flank. Meanwhile, the main Greek force transformed the battlefield with practical adaptations. They cleared limited fields of fire, positioned obstacles to channel Persian advances, and established observation points with signal systems for rapid communication. These preparations, though hasty, reflected the professional military expertise of the Spartan officers. From these defensive positions, the Greeks could see across the Malian plain, where the Persian multitudes would soon appear. Beyond tactical considerations, the setting carried profound symbolic resonance. Here, between mountain and sea, a line had been drawn that represented more than mere geography. It marked the boundary between Persian imperial ambition and Greek independence, between submission to a god-king and adherence to human law. As final preparations concluded, Leonidas conducted religious ceremonies essential to Greek military custom. Priests accompanying the expedition examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, seeking divine guidance. The initial omens appeared unfavorable, a sobering message that the gods foresaw death for those who fought. Yet Leonidas, having already accepted the Delphic prophecy about a king's necessary sacrifice, pressed forward undeterred. The night before the Persians arrived, Greek scouts returned with intelligence about enemy numbers and composition. The reports confirmed what many had feared. The Persian host stretched beyond sight across the Malian plain. Campfires illuminated the darkness like fallen stars, each flame representing dozens of enemy soldiers. Before dawn, mist from the hot springs enveloped the pass, creating an otherworldly atmosphere as the Greeks made final preparations for the coming onslaught. Atop the rebuilt wall, Leonidas gathered his commanders. With laconic precision, he outlined their strategy. Hold the narrows, force the Persians to commit their troops through the bottleneck, and inflict maximum casualties before the next rotation of defenders moved forward. The Greeks would fight in disciplined shifts, ensuring fresh troops always faced the enemy, while exhausted units withdrew for rest. The battlefield's confined dimensions actually simplified Greek tactical requirements. There would be no complex maneuvers, no flanking opportunities, no cavalry charges. Instead, the conflict would reduce to its most essential form, a test of discipline, stamina, and will. The phalanx, the interlocked shield wall that represented Greek tactical innovation, would face its greatest challenge. At the heart of this formation stood the aspes, the bronze-faced wooden shield carried by each hoplite. 3 feet in diameter and weighing approximately 16 pounds, the aspis was designed for collective rather than individual defense. Each warrior's shield protected not only himself, but also the left side of the man beside him, creating an overlapping wall of bronze. This system demanded absolute cohesion. If a single man broke ranks, he endangered his entire line. As the first light of dawn illuminated the coastal corridor, the mists parted to reveal the Greek position. The bronze of their shields and helmet crests gleamed in the morning sun. Behind the disciplined front ranks stood rotation forces, ready to replace the vanguard as exhaustion set in. Behind them, on higher ground, archers from various city-states prepared to provide supporting fire. The fateful ground was now prepared, a stage set for heroism, sacrifice, and tactical brilliance. It awaited only the entrance of the Persian host to begin one of history's most consequential dramas. Within hours, the narrow pass between mountain and sea would witness the collision of opposing civilizations, a crucible in which the future of Western culture hung in the balance. The initial Persian scouts who crested the final ridge overlooking the Hot Gates brought back reports that visibly troubled Xerxes. The narrow pass was not undefended, as hoped, but held by a small force dominated by warriors bearing the crimson cloaks and lambda-emblazoned shields of Sparta. Herodotus recounts the great king's disbelief upon learning that these Greeks were not preparing for flight, but rather engaging in what appeared to be casual activities. Some exercised naked, others combed their long hair with apparent unconcern. Demaratus, the exiled Spartan king in Xerxes' entourage, explained this seemingly bizarre behavior. These men have come to fight us for the pass, and for this they prepare themselves. It is their custom to attend to their hair when they are about to risk their lives. Know that if you overcome these men, and those remaining behind at Sparta, there is no other race of humans who will raise their hands against you. You are now facing the noblest kingdom in Greece and the bravest men. Xerxes, convinced that such a small force would retreat once the full Persian army appeared, waited 4 days before ordering an attack. This delay served multiple purposes. It allowed his main body to consolidate, gave an opportunity for the Greeks to reconsider their hopeless position, and enabled his commanders to scout the enemy dispositions. When no Greek withdrawal materialized, the great king reluctantly ordered the first assault. The initial Persian attack began with a thunderous volley of arrows that darkened the sky, prompting Dieneke's famous quip about fighting in the shade. Most missiles clattered harmlessly against the Greeks' overlapping shields, or embedded themselves in the rebuilt wall. The Median and Sicyan infantry, tasked with the first assault, advanced toward the Greek position in densely packed columns. As they approached the narrows, they compressed further, losing formation coherence as they funneled into the restricted space. The Greeks awaited this advance in their signature phalanx formation. The front rank knelt with shields braced against the ground, presenting an unbroken wall of bronze to the approaching Persians. Behind them, subsequent ranks held their spears at varying heights, creating a bristling hedge of lethal points. When the Median wave crashed against this formation, they found themselves unable to penetrate the disciplined shield wall. Their shorter spears could not reach the Greeks, while the Greek dory, the primary thrusting spear measuring 7 to 9 feet, outreached Persian weapons. As the Persian assault intensified, the true superiority of Greek heavy infantry revealed itself. The hoplite phalanx functioned not merely as a defensive barrier, but as an offensive weapon, a collective battering ram of bronze and muscle. Using a coordinated technique called othismos, the push, the Greek front ranks literally pressed forward, driving their shields into the enemy, while the rear ranks added physical pressure. This relentless pushing forced the Persians back, often causing them to stumble over their own fallen comrades. The disciplined rotation system employed by the Greeks maintained their fighting effectiveness. When the front-line fighters showed signs of fatigue, a trumpet signal prompted a carefully rehearsed maneuver. Fresh troops moved forward through the ranks to replace the exhausted vanguard, executed so smoothly that the front never lost cohesion. This system allowed the Greeks to maintain consistent fighting intensity, while the Persians had no similar rotation method for their forward elements. After several hours of futile assaults that achieved nothing but mounting casualties, the Median and Sicyan units withdrew. Xerxes, watching from a specially constructed throne on a hillside overlooking the battlefield, reportedly stood in rage at this unexpected resistance. He immediately ordered the Immortals, his elite personal guard, to advance and break the Greek position. The Immortals, with their distinctive scale armor and standardized weapons, represented the finest Persian infantry. They advanced with disciplined precision uncommon among other imperial contingents. Yet even these elite troops found themselves neutralized by the brutal calculus of the mountain corridor. Their superior numbers, the very foundation of Persian military doctrine, became meaningless when only a limited front could engage the enemy. In the confined space, the battle reduced to a contest of equipment, training, and will. The Greek equipment provided significant advantages in this close-quarters combat. The bronze-faced Aspis shield, with its concave design, offered superior protection compared to the lighter wicker shields of most Persian units. Greek bronze helmets, though heavy, provided crucial protection against downward strikes. Most importantly, the Greek dory spear outreached Persian weapons, allowing the defenders to inflict casualties while remaining beyond their opponent's effective range. Throughout the first day's combat, individual acts of bravery punctuated the collective clash of formations. Herodotus records that 2 brothers of Xerxes himself fell in these initial assaults, killed at the forefront while attempting to inspire their men. On the Greek side, a Spartan named Dionysus distinguished himself through both his fighting prowess and his unwavering composure under fire. Another Spartan, Alpheus, together with his brother Maron, formed an impenetrable section of the defensive line that repeatedly repulsed Persian attacks. As dusk approached, the Persians withdrew to regroup. The first day's fighting had yielded a shocking outcome. The world's greatest empire had hurled thousands of warriors against a few hundred Greeks and achieved nothing but casualties. Xerxes, accustomed to swift victories, found himself confronting an unfamiliar situation, an enemy that neither feared his numbers nor respected his divine authority. Night brought no respite from tension. Under cover of darkness, both sides tended to their wounded and prepared for the next day's confrontation. Greek sentries maintained vigilant watch, wary of night attacks. The Persians, meanwhile, reorganized their forces and considered new tactics for the morning assault. Throughout both camps, the distinct sounds of sharpening weapons and murmured prayers created an ominous backdrop to the brief interval between battles. At dawn on the second day, Xerxes renewed the attack with fresh troops. Learning from the previous day's failures, Persian commanders modified their tactics. Rather than sustaining continuous pressure, they launched a series of coordinated assaults. Each wave would surge forward, engage briefly, then withdraw to be replaced by fresh forces, attempting to exhaust the numerically inferior Greeks through relentless pressure. The Persian archers, positioned on elevated ground, provided covering fire for these advances. Their arrows, though individually less lethal against armored hoplites, caused casualties through sheer volume and forced the Greeks to maintain their protective shield coverage. This missile barrage particularly targeted officers identifiable by their distinctive helmet crests, hoping to disrupt the Greek command structure. Despite these refined approaches, the the fundamental dynamic remained unchanged. The Greek phalanx held firm against wave after wave of attackers. When Persian units managed to create temporary breaches in the formation, quick responding Greek reserves sealed these vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. The rebuilt wall, though damaged in several places, continued to provide a crucial defensive anchor for the Greek position. Throughout the second day, Leonidas personally led from the front, rotating between different sections of the line to inspire his men and assess tactical developments. Unlike the Persian king, who watched from a distance, the Spartan ruler shared every danger with his soldiers. This visible leadership reinforced morale among both Spartans and allied contingents, who witnessed their commander exhibiting the same courage he demanded from them. Simultaneously with the land battle, the naval engagement at nearby Artemisium unfolded with similar intensity. The Greek fleet, commanded primarily by Athenian and Corinthian triarchs, under the nominal leadership of the Spartan Eurybiades, engaged the Persian navy in the narrow strait. Like at the coastal defile, the confined waters neutralized Persian numerical superiority. Runners maintained communication between the two battlefronts, each force drawing resolve from knowledge that their counterparts continued to resist. As the second day of fighting drew to a close, the Persians again withdrew, with little to show for their efforts besides mounting casualties. Greek losses, while significant, remained sustainable due to their disciplined fighting system. The wounded received treatment from physicians who had accompanied the expedition, utilizing herbs, wine for disinfection, and bandages to return as many fighters as possible to combat readiness. That evening, while Persian commanders debated increasingly desperate tactical options, an unexpected visitor approached their camp. Ephialtes, a local Malian, requested an audience with Persian officers. Motivated either by promised reward or fear of Persian retribution against his region, he revealed a devastating secret: the existence of a mountain path that circumvented the main pass. For the right price, he would guide a Persian detachment along this route, allowing them to outflank the Greek position and attack from behind. This treachery, more than any tactical brilliance or overwhelming numbers, would prove decisive. Xerxes immediately grasped the strategic opportunity and ordered Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals, to lead a force along the hidden path under cover of darkness. Meanwhile, the main Persian army would launch fresh attacks at dawn to fix the Greek defenders in position, unaware of the outflanking threat developing in the mountains above them. As these Persian units began their stealthy ascent, guided by Ephialtes, the third day of battle approached, bringing with it the dramatic climax of the confrontation at the mountain gateway. In the darkest hours before dawn on the third day, while most of the Greek defenders slept in brief respite from battle, a column of Persian immortals wound their way silently along the Thermopylae path. This narrow track, more suited to mountain goats than armored men, twisted through dense forests and across treacherous ravines on the slopes of Mount Calidramon. Leading them was Ephialtes of Trachis, a local Greek whose name would become synonymous with treachery for millennia to come. The Thermopylae path represented the fatal vulnerability in the Greek defensive position. Beginning east of Thermopylae and ascending through oak forests onto the mountain's shoulders, it eventually descended to rejoin the coastal road behind the Greek lines. Though difficult terrain, it provided a viable route for disciplined infantry able to move in single file. Leonidas had not overlooked this danger. He had stationed 1,000 Phocian hoplites along the path precisely to prevent such a flanking maneuver. As the Persian column approached the Phocian position under cover of pre-dawn darkness, an unexpected sound betrayed their advance. The rustling of oak leaves beneath thousands of feet alerted the Greek sentries. Herodotus records that the Phocians realized an enemy approached not by sight, but by the distinctive sound of leaves crunching underfoot, a sound amplified by the still mountain air. Alarmed, the Phocian commanders hastily roused their men. Still adjusting armor and forming ranks, they watched as the shadowy mass of Persian infantry emerged from the forest. The Immortals, seeing these defenders, immediately halted their advance, while runners informed Hydarnes, their commander. Expecting a pitched battle, the Phocians withdrew to a defensible slope adjacent to the path and prepared for combat. Here occurred the fateful miscalculation that would doom the main Greek force. Rather than engaging the Phocians, Hydarnes ordered his men to simply bypass them. The Persian column diverted slightly from the path, keeping to the forest coverage, and continued their advance, leaving the bewildered Phocians on their hilltop position. This Persian decision reflected clear strategic priority. Their objective was not to defeat every Greek unit they encountered, but to complete the flanking maneuver before Leonidas could withdraw his main force. When the Phocian officers realized the Persians had continued their advance, they dispatched runners to alert Leonidas. These messengers raced down the mountain paths, but the circuitous route and difficult terrain delayed their arrival. Meanwhile, the Persian flanking force continued its inexorable advance toward the rear of the Greek position. Back at the main pass, the first light of dawn brought fresh Persian assaults against the Greek front. Unlike previous attacks, however, these seemed less determined, almost perfunctory. This change in intensity, though initially welcome, raised suspicions among experienced Spartan officers. They sensed something had changed in the Persian approach, but could not yet identify what. Midway through the morning, the runners from the Phocian contingent finally reached Leonidas with their alarming news. The king immediately convened his commanders to address this existential threat. Scouts confirmed that a substantial Persian force had bypassed the Phocians and would reach the Greek rear within hours. The strategic situation had fundamentally changed. The position at Thermopylae, so defensible from the front, would become a death trap once surrounded. This crisis point forced Leonidas to make the most consequential decision of the entire campaign. Historical accounts suggest that heated debate erupted among the Greek commanders. Some advocated immediate withdrawal of the entire force while escape remained possible. Others argued for maintaining position until nightfall, then attempting a breakout under darkness. The Spartan king listened to these arguments before announcing his fateful decision. According to Herodotus, Leonidas dismissed the majority of the allied contingents, ordering them to retreat while the path remained open. He retained only his 300 Spartans, the Thespian contingent, who refused to withdraw, and the Theban force, whose loyalty remained suspect and whom he may have kept as hostages. This decision reflected multiple considerations: military necessity, cultural obligation, and religious prophecy. From a tactical perspective, a rear guard was essential to prevent Persian pursuit of the retreating allies. Without a covering force to delay the enemy, the withdrawing Greeks would be overtaken on open ground, where Persian numerical superiority would prove decisive. The sacrifice of a smaller force could preserve the larger army for future battles. Culturally, Spartan military ethics forbade retreat regardless of circumstances. The famous Spartan injunction, "Come back with your shield or on it," represented a societal expectation that warriors would return victorious or dead, never defeated. For Leonidas to abandon the position would violate the core principles upon which Spartan identity rested. Most profoundly, the Delphic prophecy still hung over the Spartan king's decision. The oracle had decreed that either Sparta would fall or a king of Heracles' line must perish. Leonidas, believing in the divine message, recognized his own role in preserving his city through self-sacrifice. By remaining at Thermopylae, he fulfilled the prophecy's requirement and ensured Sparta's survival. Before the main allied force departed, Leonidas reportedly delivered a laconic message for them to carry back to Sparta. "Go tell them that we remain here, obedient to their laws." This phrase would later be immortalized on the monument erected at Thermopylae after the Persian Wars concluded. The Thespian contingent, approximately 700 men, led by their general Demophilus, voluntarily chose to remain with the Spartans. This decision, less heralded than the Spartan sacrifice but equally valorous, demonstrated that commitment to Greek freedom extended beyond Sparta's warrior culture. The Thespians, citizens of a small Boeotian city without Sparta's military reputation, showed that courage could emerge from ordinary men facing extraordinary circumstances. As the majority of the Greek army withdrew southward, those remaining at Thermopylae prepared for their final defense. No longer constrained by the need to preserve their force for subsequent days of battle, they could commit fully to exacting the maximum cost from their attackers. Leonidas repositioned his men away from their previous defensive line at the middle gate, advancing into the wider section of the pass to meet the frontal Persian assault. This tactical shift reflected a fundamental change in objective. Previously, the Greeks had sought to hold the position indefinitely, fighting defensively behind their fortifications. Now, knowing death was inevitable, they transformed from defenders into attackers. Their goal became inflicting maximum Persian casualties before being overwhelmed, a final, lethal demonstration of Greek martial prowess. Throughout this dramatic transition, communication between Thermopylae and Artemisium continued. When the naval commanders learned of the outflanking maneuver and Leonidas's decision, they likewise voted to withdraw their fleet. The strategic linkage between the land and sea battles, a cornerstone of the original Greek plan, remained intact even in retreat. The Greek ships would reposition at Salamis, preparing for the naval confrontation that would ultimately determine the war's outcome. As the day progressed, Persian observers noted the reduced Greek numbers and reported to Xerxes. The great king, believing victory finally within grasp, ordered a coordinated attack from both front and rear. The immortals who had navigated the mountain path now emerged behind the Greek position, completing the encirclement. Caught between these forces, with their escape routes severed, Leonidas and his remaining warriors prepared for their final stand. The night before this last battle carried a solemn atmosphere unlike previous evenings. The Greeks performed abbreviated funeral rites for themselves, an unprecedented action that acknowledged their impending fate. According to Plutarch, Leonidas explained their austere final meal, saying, "Dine well, for tonight we shall dine in the underworld." Whether historical or apocryphal, this statement captures the fatalistic acceptance that permeated the Greek camp. As darkness deepened across the battlefield, the defenders of Thermopylae faced their mortality with the disciplined courage their cultures had instilled in them. The Spartans conducted their traditional battle preparations, combing their long hair and readying their weapons with methodical care. The Thespians, though lacking Sparta's lifelong military conditioning, found their own resolve in brotherhood and commitment to Greek freedom. Even the Thebans, whose city would soon ally with Persia, prepared to fight rather than surrender. Dawn would bring the final confrontation, a battle without hope of victory, yet central to Greece's ultimate triumph. The betrayal by Ephialtes had transformed a strategic delaying action into a deliberate sacrifice. But in doing so, it elevated Thermopylae from mere military engagement to immortal symbol. The coming day would witness the culmination of the Greek stand, a last magnificent display of valor that would echo through centuries and inspire countless generations with its testament to human courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Dawn broke on the final day at the hot gates with a crimson sky, a fitting herald for the blood soon to stain the narrow pass. The remaining defenders, no longer fighting for victory, but for how they would be remembered, abandoned their previous defensive positions behind the Phocian wall. Instead, Leonidas led his men into the wider part of the mountain corridor, where they could maneuver more freely and inflict maximum casualties before their inevitable defeat. This tactical shift reflected their changed objective. No longer constrained to holding ground, they sought to kill as many Persians as possible before falling themselves. Herodotus writes that the Greeks now fought with reckless abandon, using hands and teeth when their weapons broke. This desperate fury stemmed not from fear, but from a cold calculation. Each Persian slain at the battlefield would not march against their retreating comrades or threaten the Greek homelands. The Persian approach likewise evolved. Xerxes, having witnessed 2 days of costly frontal assaults, orchestrated a more methodical attack. The immortals who had navigated the mountain path now closed from behind, while fresh troops pressed from the front. Persian officers, understanding the suicidal resolve of their opponents, drove reluctant infantry forward with whips, forcing waves of men against the Greek position through intimidation. As the battle commenced, the remaining Greeks formed a compact circle on a small hill, defending all directions simultaneously. This formation, unlike the traditional phalanx designed for frontal engagement, allowed them to resist the encirclement briefly. With shields facing outward and spears bristling in all directions, they resembled a bronze-armored hedgehog awaiting the hunter's spears. Individual acts of heroism punctuated the collective struggle. Dieneces, already renowned for his laconic wit about fighting in the shade, fell while protecting a wounded comrade. The brothers Alpheus and Maron, fighting side by side as they had since childhood, accounted for dozens of Persian casualties before being overwhelmed. Leonidas himself fought in the forefront rather than commanding from behind, embodying the Spartan principle that leaders must share every danger with those they lead. The king's death marked a crucial turning point in the battle. Ancient sources disagree on precisely how Leonidas fell. Some claim an arrow struck him, others that multiple Persian spearmen coordinated their attack against him. All accounts agree, however, that his body became the focal point of the conflict's most intense fighting. Understanding the Greek reverence for their fallen, Persian commanders ordered special efforts to seize the king's corpse, both for practical demoralization and symbolic triumph. The Spartans responded with fanatical determination to protect their fallen leader. Herodotus recounts that they repulsed 4 Persian assaults specifically aimed at claiming Leonidas's body. This extraordinary effort, maintaining formation while carrying their dead king, demonstrated the profound cultural importance Spartans placed on returning their fallen to proper burial. For these warriors, abandoning their king's body would constitute a disgrace worse than death. During this phase of the battle, the Thebans, whose presence among the final defenders remained somewhat ambiguous, reportedly surrendered to the Persians. Herodotus suggests they had remained unwillingly, held as hostages by Leonidas, who doubted their loyalty. When Persian breakthrough became inevitable, they laid down arms and begged quarter, identifying themselves as sympathizers to the Persian cause. Whether this represents historical fact or Herodotus's Athenian bias against Thebes remains debated. The Thespians, by contrast, fought alongside the Spartans until the end. Led by Demophilus, these citizen soldiers from a small Boeotian city lacked the Spartans' lifetime of military conditioning, yet matched their courage. Their voluntary sacrifice, less celebrated in popular retellings but equally significant, demonstrated that resistance to Persian domination transcended Sparta's unique warrior culture. Ordinary Greeks from modest cities proved willing to die for the emerging concept of freedom. As their numbers dwindled, the remaining defenders withdrew to the most defensible feature, a small hill where today a modern monument marks the battle's final phase. Here, with broken spears and damaged shields, they made their last stand. Persian archers, positioned on surrounding heights, poured volleys of arrows into the shrinking Greek circle. When missiles proved insufficient, Persian infantry charged from all directions in overwhelming force. The final moments of the battle witnessed a transition from organized combat to desperate individual struggles. Greeks with broken spears drew swords. The xiphos, a short blade designed for close combat when formation fighting collapsed. When swords shattered against Persian armor, they fought with daggers, rocks, and bare hands. One Spartan, Aristodemus, suffering from an eye infection, had been ordered to return home before the final battle, a circumstance that would later subject him to severe ostracism in Sparta as the trembler who had survived while his comrades perished. With the Greeks finally overwhelmed, Xerxes ordered special treatment for Leonidas's body. According to Herodotus, the great king, enraged by the unprecedented resistance that had cost him thousands of soldiers, commanded that the Spartan king be decapitated and his head impaled on a stake, an extraordinary dishonor in Persian custom normally reserved for rebels and oathbreakers. This desecration, intended to demoralize other Greeks, instead crystallized their hatred of Persian rule and strengthened their resolve to resist. The remaining Greek bodies lay where they had fallen, initially denied burial rites so essential to their religious beliefs. Persian warriors stripped their armor and weapons, claiming trophies from these worthy opponents. Among the Spartans, identification proved difficult. Unlike other Greeks who wore identifying insignia, the Spartans carried only their distinctive lambda-emblazoned shields and red cloaks as unit identification. With the pass now cleared, Xerxes led his commanders on a tour of the battlefield, surveying the cost of his victory. Herodotus records that the Persian king specifically asked to see the fallen Spartans, having developed a grudging respect for these adversaries, who alone had refused to submit to his divine authority. Observing their muscular physiques and the peaceful expressions on their faces, a Spartan was expected to die with a composed expression regardless of pain. He reportedly remarked on the quality of men who had opposed him. Among the Persian dead lay two of Xerxes' own brothers, high-ranking officers who had fallen leading assaults against the Greek position. Their deaths, while overshadowed by the more famous Greek sacrifice, represented significant political implications within the Persian court. Royal blood had been spilled to secure this passage into central Greece, a cost the great king had not anticipated when launching his invasion. As the dust settled over the bloody ground, the Persian army prepared to advance southward. The strategic objective, opening the path to central Greece, had been achieved, but at a psychological and material cost far exceeding expectations. What should have been a minor skirmish against a token resistance had consumed 3 days and thousands of Persian lives, including elite units and nobles. More importantly, it had shattered the aura of Persian invincibility that had prompted so many Greek cities to surrender without resistance. For the Greeks who had fallen, death brought a paradoxical immortality. As their blood soaked into the stony ground of the mountain pass, their sacrifice was already transcending military significance to enter the realm of legend. The poet Simonides, commissioned to create an epitaph for their memorial, would later compose the most famous military epitaph in history. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. These simple lines captured the essence of their sacrifice, not merely courage in battle, but submission to a higher principle. The Spartans and their allies had died, not because they feared their leaders or expected divine rewards, but because their cultural code demanded it. In choosing death over dishonor, they established a standard of civic devotion that would inspire emulation for millennia. As night fell over the bloodied pass, an unnatural silence replaced the day's chaos. The Persian army, despite its victory, camped with heightened vigilance, newly respectful of Greek capabilities. Miles southward, the main Greek force continued its retreat, carrying news of both defeat and transcendent sacrifice. The battle at the mountain gateway had ended, but its meaning was just beginning to unfold across the Greek world and through the corridors of history yet to come. While Leonidas and his men made their final stand at the Hot Gates, an equally crucial battle unfolded just miles away on the azure waters off Artemisium. Here, the Greek fleet, primarily Athenian triremes supplemented by vessels from other maritime states, engaged the Persian navy in a sprawling 3-day naval confrontation that mirrored the land battle in both timing and strategic significance. The naval engagement at Artemisium represented a critical complement to the stand at the mountain pass. The two positions had been selected as a strategic pair, the narrow coastal defile and the confined strait between Euboea and the mainland created bottlenecks that neutralized Persian numerical advantages on both land and sea. More importantly, they provided mutual support. Neither position remained viable if the other fell. If Persian ships bypassed Artemisium, they could land troops behind the Greek defenders. If Persian troops controlled the coastal corridor, they could attack the Greek fleet from land. Command of the Greek fleet nominally fell to the Spartan Eurybiades, though his appointment represented political compromise rather than naval expertise. Sparta's limited maritime experience made Eurybiades dependent on advisors from seafaring states, particularly Themistocles of Athens. This arrangement, formal Spartan leadership with practical Athenian guidance, paralleled the command structure at the battlefield and reflected the delicate balance of power within the Greek alliance. The first day of naval combat began when the Persian fleet approached in overwhelming force, approximately 600 ships against the Greeks' 271 triremes. Rather than meeting this armada in open water, the Greek commanders implemented a defensive strategy suited to their inferior numbers. They formed their ships into a circle, bows facing outward like the spines of a sea urchin, minimizing the risk of being outflanked or surrounded. This formation, while sacrificing offensive capability, prevented the Persian ships from utilizing their superior maneuverability. As evening approached on that first day, the Greeks executed a series of limited attacks against isolated Persian vessels, capturing or sinking 30 enemy ships. More significantly, they demonstrated that Persian naval supremacy, like their land dominance, could be challenged through superior tactics and local knowledge. The Greek triarchs, ship captains, used their understanding of local currents and winds to gain positional advantages, forcing Persian vessels into unfavorable engagements. That night, as both fleets withdrew to separate anchorages, nature intervened dramatically. A violent summer storm, the same phenomenon that had struck Persian forces at Mount Pelion earlier in the campaign, battered the coastline. The Greek ships, sheltered in the lee of Euboea, suffered minimal damage. The Persian fleet, with no natural harbour large enough to accommodate their numbers, weathered the gale in exposed positions. By dawn, hundreds of Persian vessels had been driven aground or smashed against coastal rocks. This divine intervention, for so the Greeks interpreted it, significantly reduced the Persian numerical advantage. Herodotus claims that 200 Persian ships were destroyed, though modern historians consider this figure exaggerated. Regardless of exact numbers, the storm represented a pivotal moment that rendered the naval contest more even than it had been initially. The second day of naval combat saw increased Greek confidence following this favorable turn of events. The Greek fleet executed more aggressive maneuvers, including a diekplaus, a tactical breakthrough where ships penetrated the enemy line, then turned to attack from behind. These engagements, while not decisive, demonstrated growing Greek effectiveness in naval warfare. Crucially, they prevented Persian naval forces from outflanking the Greek position by sea, maintaining the integrity of the combined defensive strategy. Throughout these naval confrontations, communication between the land battle and Artemisium continued via signal fires and messenger boats. When news arrived that Leonidas had discovered the mountain path and positioned Phocian troops to guard it, the naval commanders adjusted their timeline accordingly. Their primary objective remained keeping Persian ships from landing troops behind the defenders at the hot gates. By the third day of naval combat, the situation had evolved significantly. The Persian fleet, despite storm losses, still outnumbered the Greeks and had begun executing more coordinated attacks. The Greek ships, showing damage from consecutive days of combat, faced increasing difficulty maintaining their defensive posture. Most critically, rumors began circulating of the Persian flanking maneuver through the mountains, news that quickly proved accurate when messengers from the battle site confirmed Leonidas's decision to dismiss most allied contingents. The Greek naval commanders convened an emergency council upon learning of the land battle's inevitable conclusion. With the mountain pass lost, the naval position at Artemisium became strategically untenable. After heated debate, with Athenian representatives particularly reluctant to abandon their position, they voted to withdraw southward. This decision, while militarily necessary, carried profound implications for communities along their retreat path, particularly Athens itself, which now lay exposed to Persian advance. As the Greek fleet sailed south through the Straits of Euboea, they employed a clever deception to mask their withdrawal. The fastest ship from each city remained behind temporarily, maintaining signal fires to suggest continued presence while the main fleet gained distance. These rearguard vessels then rejoined their contingents, having successfully misled Persian naval scouts about the timing of the Greek departure. The coordinated withdrawal from both the coastal defile and Artemisium represented not merely tactical retreat, but strategic recalibration. The Greek alliance, now understanding the full might of Persian forces, adjusted their defensive concept. Rather than attempting to block the Persian advance at its entry to central Greece, they would concentrate forces at the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow land bridge connecting the Peloponnese to the mainland, while seeking a decisive naval engagement at Salamis. For Athens, these strategic decisions proved especially painful. With the northern pass lost, nothing substantial stood between the Persian army and their city. Themistocles urged a radical solution: complete evacuation of Athens. Every man, woman, and child would abandon the city, seeking refuge on Salamis and other islands, while the fleet prepared for decisive battle. This unprecedented proposal, to voluntarily surrender their city without a fight, triggered fierce debate within the Athenian assembly. Meanwhile, as Xerxes surveyed the scene of the recent fighting, his commanders assessed their victory's cost. Though ultimately successful, the three-day engagement had consumed thousands of Persian lives, including elite troops and royal relatives. The psychological impact proved equally significant. Greek resistance had far exceeded expectations, challenging Persian assumptions about Western military capabilities. Nevertheless, the strategic prize had been secured. The path into central Greece now lay open. The Persian advance following the battle demonstrated both momentum and caution. Detachments pursued retreating Greek forces, but avoided overextending their lines. The main army proceeded methodically, securing territory and accepting the surrender of regions too exposed to resist. Boeotia, including Thebes, formally submitted to Persian authority. Phocis, whose contingent had failed to guard the mountain path, suffered particular devastation as punishment for their resistance. 4 days after the battle, Persian forces reached the abandoned Athenian countryside. Farms stood empty, livestock driven away, wells filled with stones. The population had vanished, implementing Themistocles' evacuation plan with remarkable discipline and speed. When advanced Persian units reached Athens itself, they found a nearly deserted city with only a small group of temple guardians and elderly citizens who had refused evacuation remaining on the Acropolis. These holdouts, interpreting the Delphic oracle's reference to wooden walls as the ancient wooden palisade around the sacred precinct, believed divine protection would preserve them. After a brief siege, Persian troops discovered an unguarded path up the precipitous northern slope, an ironic echo of the mountain trail at the earlier battle, and overwhelmed the defenders. Xerxes ordered Athens burned, with particular attention to religious structures, symbolically punishing the Greeks for their impiety in resisting his divinely ordained rule. The smoke from Athens' burning temples, visible from Salamis, where the evacuated population watched in horror, might have represented the culmination of Persian victory. Instead, it marked the turning point of the entire campaign. The Greek fleet, now consolidated and fighting with the desperation of those who had sacrificed everything, achieved decisive victory in the narrow waters of Salamis. This naval triumph, followed the next year by the land victory at Plataea, would ultimately drive the Persians from Greece. Throughout these later engagements, the stand at the hot gates cast a long shadow. Greek commanders invoked the sacrifice of Leonidas and his men to inspire their troops. Persian officers, having witnessed Spartan prowess firsthand, approached subsequent engagements with newfound caution. Most significantly, the psychological impact of the heroic defense transformed Greek self-perception. They had proven themselves capable of resisting the world's greatest empire, not merely through superior position, but through superior resolve. For Ephialtes, the Greek who betrayed the mountain path, the aftermath brought infamy rather than reward. Though Xerxes reportedly paid him for his treachery, he found himself universally despised. No Greek city would grant him sanctuary. Eventually, according to Herodotus, he was killed at Anticyra by Leonidas of Trachis for reasons unrelated to his betrayal, though few contemporaries likely believed this coincidence. The Amphictyonic League placed a price on his head, and his name became synonymous with traitor throughout the Greek-speaking world. Archaeological evidence from the aftermath period remains limited. The ancient battlefield has changed dramatically through natural processes. The coastline has advanced significantly due to sediment deposits from the Spercheios River. placing the original battle site nearly a mile inland from today's shore. Limited excavations have uncovered arrowheads, spear points, and fragments of bronze armor, providing physical confirmation of Herodotus's account. Most poignantly, archaeologists identified a burial mound containing approximately 300 individuals, likely the Spartan dead, collected and interred after the Persians were ultimately driven from Greece. The wider strategic impact of the twin battles at the mountain pass and Artemisium extended far beyond their immediate military outcomes. By delaying the Persian advance, these engagements provided critical time for southern Greek cities to complete their defensive preparations. The psychological effect proved equally important, demonstrating that effective resistance was possible and establishing moral paradigms of sacrifice that would inspire continued Greek defiance. Though technically Persian victories, both battles created conditions essential for ultimate Greek success. When evaluated in isolation, the stand at the Hot Gates appears a clear Persian triumph. When viewed within the broader context of the Persian Wars, however, it represents a successful implementation of defensive delay that contributed significantly to eventual Greek victory. The seeds planted by Leonidas' sacrifice would bear fruit at Salamis and Plataea, battles that secured not just Greek independence, but the cultural flowering that would become classical Greek civilization. In the decades following the Persian retreat from Greece, the memory of the stand at the Hot Gates underwent transformation from recent history into foundational legend. The battle transcended its immediate military significance to become a moral exemplar, a narrative framework through which Greeks, and eventually all Western civilization, would conceptualize the ideals of patriotism, sacrifice, and resistance to tyranny. This metamorphosis began almost immediately after the war's conclusion, when allied Greek forces finally pushed the Persians back across the Hellespont in 479 BC. Attention turned to commemorating those who had fallen. At the mountain pass, they erected a stone lion in honor of Leonidas atop the hill where the last Spartans fell. Nearby, they placed 3 inscriptions, one honoring the Peloponnesians who had fought, another specifically commemorating the Spartans, and most famously, the epigram composed by Simonides. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. These simple lines, with their address to the passerby, their instruction to bear witness, and their emphasis on obedience to law rather than king or commander, captured something essential about Greek self-understanding. They articulated the revolutionary concept that free men fighting for their laws might display greater courage than subjects compelled by a master's whip. The Spartan state developed particular rituals to commemorate the heroic defense. Every year, they held funeral games honoring the 300 and recited their names in public ceremony. The sons of those who fell received special state benefits, while their families enjoyed heightened social prestige. Intriguingly, the one survivor from the 300, Aristodemus, who had been ordered back due to an eye infection, faced such severe social ostracism that he eventually sought redemption through a suicidal display of courage at the Battle of Plataea. In Athens, the battle received different treatment. While honoring the Spartans' sacrifice, Athenian orators subtly emphasized their own city's naval contribution at Artemisium and eventually Salamis. This rhetorical positioning reflected the post-war competition for prestige between Athens and Sparta, with each claiming primary credit for Greece's salvation from Persian domination. Throughout the 5th century BC, the legendary Last Stand featured prominently in Greek educational curricula. Young men memorized accounts of the battle, studied Simonides' epigrams, and absorbed its moral lessons. These lessons emphasized not just courage, but particular aspects of virtue with profound cultural implications, choosing honor over survival, placing communal good above individual interest, and demonstrating unwavering discipline in the face of overwhelming adversity. The historical legacy gained particularly powerful expression through Herodotus, whose The Histories provided the most comprehensive ancient account of the Persian Wars. Writing approximately 30 years after the events, Herodotus interviewed survivors, consulted existing records, and traveled extensively to battle sites. Though modern historians identify elements of dramatic embellishment in his work, the core narrative and many specific details have withstood scholarly scrutiny. Herodotus framed the defense at the narrow pass as a pivotal moment in the larger clash between East and West, between Asian despotism and Greek freedom. This interpretive framework, while oversimplifying complex cultural differences, proved extraordinarily influential in Western historical consciousness. It established a narrative template that would be invoked repeatedly whenever Western powers faced Eastern adversaries. From Alexander's campaigns against Persia to the Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union. Beyond written histories, the famous battle permeated Greek artistic expression. Vase paintings depicted Spartan warriors in their distinctive postures. Sculptors created idealized representations of key figures, particularly Leonidas. Dramatists incorporated references to the battle in tragedies, exploring themes of duty, sacrifice, and fate. These artistic interpretations simultaneously preserved historical memory and transformed it, emphasizing elements with contemporary cultural resonance while downplaying others. Archaeological evidence provides physical connection to these commemorative practices. Excavations at Sparta uncovered remains of monuments to heroes of the mountain gateway, including a shrine to Leonidas established generations after his death. At the battlefield itself, fragments of the original memorial column have been recovered, along with votive offerings left by ancient visitors. These material traces confirm that the site functioned as a place of pilgrimage, a physical location where Greeks connected with their defining national narrative. As classical Greek civilization gave way to Hellenistic kingdoms following Alexander's conquests, the symbolism of the famous Last Stand evolved accordingly. For Macedonia's rulers, who positioned themselves as heirs to both Greek and Persian traditions, the battle represented the heroic age they sought to emulate, rather than living political reality. When Rome eventually absorbed the Greek world, the heroic tale entered a broader Mediterranean historical consciousness, interpreted through Roman concepts of virtues, manliness, and pietas, duty. The Roman admiral and encyclopedist Pliny the Elder offered an assessment that became standard in Roman understanding. The most glorious battle ever fought on land was not, in my judgment, the victory of Mardonius at Plataea, nor that of Pausanias over the Persians, but that of Leonidas, king of the Lacedaemonians, at the Hot Gates. This Roman admiration reflected cultural values shared with the Greeks, particularly the nobility of choosing honorable death over disgraceful survival. Throughout late antiquity and the Byzantine period, the memory of the battle remained vividly alive in Greek cultural identity, though increasingly filtered through Christian interpretative frameworks. Byzantine authors drew parallels between Spartan sacrifice and Christian martyrdom, both involving conscious acceptance of death for higher principles. This recontextualization allowed the pre-Christian exemplars to retain their moral authority within a Christianized civilization. Western Europe's rediscovery of classical texts during the Renaissance reinvigorated interest in the ancient confrontation. Humanist scholars translated accounts into vernacular languages, making the story accessible beyond Greek and Latin readers. Political philosophers, including Machiavelli, referenced the battle when discussing civic virtue and proper relations between citizens and state. This renewed engagement came precisely as European powers faced their own Eastern threat in the expanding Ottoman Empire, lending contemporary relevance to ancient resistance. The American and French revolutions marked another turning point in the battle's cultural resonance. Revolutionary leaders explicitly invoked the stand at the mountain pass as precedent for their own struggles against monarchical power. When Thomas Jefferson designed educational curricula for the new American Republic, he specifically included Plutarch's account of the battle as essential reading for developing civic virtue. The Greek War of Independence represented perhaps the most direct historical echo of the ancient resistance. Modern Greeks fighting Ottoman rule consciously modeled their resistance on ancient precedents, with revolutionary documents explicitly referencing Leonidas and the 300. When Lord Byron joined the Greek cause, bringing wider European attention, he composed poetry linking contemporary Greek freedom fighters to their ancient forebears at the narrow passage. Physical memorialization at the battle site evolved through successive periods. The ancient monuments, damaged by time and later conflicts, were supplemented by modern commemorative structures. Today's visitors encounter a contemporary bronze statue of Leonidas, erected in 1955, along with a hill inscribed with Simonides' famous epitaph. The nearby museum houses artifacts recovered from archaeological investigations, including Persian arrowheads and fragments of Greek armor. Archaeological research has enhanced understanding of the battlefield's physical context, while challenging certain narrative elements. Geological studies confirm that the coastline has advanced significantly since 480 BC due to silt deposition from the Spercheios River, placing the ancient battle site considerably inland from today's shoreline. This geographical evolution complicates battlefield reconstruction and explains certain descriptive discrepancies in ancient accounts. Recovery of physical artifacts provides tangible connection to the engagement. Bronze arrowheads, consistent with Persian design, have been found in patterns suggesting massive missile barrages described by Herodotus. Spear points, broken sword fragments, and helmet pieces testify to the desperate close-quarters combat of the battle's final phase. Most significantly, a burial mound containing approximately 300 individuals, likely the recovered Spartan dead, confirms the general scale and location of Herodotus's account. Modern scholarly debates continue regarding numerous aspects of the famous confrontation. The actual size of the Persian force, described by Herodotus as millions, but estimated by contemporary historians between 100,000 to 300,000, remains contested. The exact timeline of the battle, the specific tactical deployments, and even the precise location of the Middle Gate generate ongoing academic discussion. These scholarly conversations, rather than diminishing the battle's significance, demonstrate its enduring historical importance. The Persian perspective on the mountain defense represents a significant historiographical gap. Persian records of the campaign have not survived, leaving their interpretation of this unexpected resistance largely conjectural. What limited information we possess suggests the engagement may have been viewed as a minor delay, rather than the civilization-defining moment it became in Western tradition. This asymmetry of historical memory itself reveals much about how societies construct meaning from military encounters. Beyond academic circles, the ancient battle maintains extraordinary cultural vitality in modern consciousness. References appear in contexts ranging from political speeches to popular entertainment, military academies to corporate leadership seminars. This persistent relevance stems from the battle's fundamental qualities, its clear moral stakes, its dramatic narrative arc, its exemplification of courage against overwhelming odds that transcend historical specificity to address universal human concerns. The ancient stand at the hot gates continues to pose essential questions that each generation must answer anew. What principles merit the ultimate sacrifice? How should individuals balance personal survival against communal welfare? What constitutes true freedom, and how far should one go to preserve it? In asking these questions through the lens of those long-dead warriors at the mountain corridor, we keep their memory alive, not merely as historical figures, but as enduring moral interlocutors across the vast expanse of time. The ancient battle at the hot gates has demonstrated remarkable resilience in modern cultural consciousness, continuously reinvented to address contemporary concerns while maintaining connection to its historical core. This enduring presence across literature, visual arts, political discourse, and popular entertainment testifies to the famous conflict's unique capacity to speak across millennia about fundamental human questions of courage, sacrifice, and resistance. Literary engagement with the legendary stand blossomed during the 19th century as romantic poets found in the ancient battle an ideal subject combining heroic individualism with transcendent purpose. Lord Byron, who would later die fighting for Greek independence, memorialized the battle in Don Juan. Earth, render back from out thy breast a remnant of our Spartan dead. Of the 300 grant but 3, to make a new Thermopylae. Byron's contemporary, the German poet Friedrich Schiller, composed Der Spaziergang, the Walk, which presents the mountain defense as a defining moment when Western civilization established its essential values. For these romantic writers, the battle represented not merely historical events, but a moral paradigm, a template for understanding heroic self-sacrifice in service to liberty. This literary tradition reached its apotheosis in A. Hausmann's 1896 poem, The Oracles, which distills the essence of the Spartan stand into 16 unforgettable lines concluding, "The king, with half the east at heel, is marched from lands of mourning. Their fighters drink the rivers up, their shafts benight the air, and he that stands will die for naught, and home there's no returning. The Spartans on the sea-wet rock sat down and combed their hair." That final image, Spartans calmly grooming themselves before certain death, captures something essential about how modernity has understood the famous last stand, as testament to disciplined courage facing inevitable defeat with composed dignity. Visual representations of the battle underwent similar evolution. Jacques-Louis David's neoclassical painting, Leonidas at Thermopylae, 1814, established the visual vocabulary that would dominate Western imagination. Muscular, semi-nude Spartans in heroic poses, preparing for battle with stoic determination. This aesthetic framework, emphasizing physical perfection as external manifestation of moral virtue, influenced generations of subsequent depictions. The 20th century brought new media through which the historic confrontation reached mass audiences. Rudolf Mattei's 1962 film, The 300 Spartans, introduced the narrative to Cold War audiences, with barely disguised parallels between ancient Persia and the contemporary Soviet Union. The film explicitly positioned Spartans as defenders of emergent democracy against totalitarian expansion. a framing that resonated with viewers during a period of heightened East-West tensions. The battle's political utility transcended ideological boundaries. During World War II, both Allied and Axis powers invoked the famous stand for propaganda purposes. Winston Churchill referenced it when rallying Britain against Nazi Germany, while Greek resistance fighters adopted it as symbolic shorthand for their struggle against Axis occupation. Even the German military found inspiration in the Spartan example of disciplined sacrifice. Though this appropriation required overlooking the conflict's ultimate meaning as resistance to invasion, the Persian perspective received little attention until recent decades, reflecting broader Eurocentric patterns in historical interpretation. Contemporary scholarship has attempted to correct this imbalance, exploring how the empire that Xerxes commanded represents far more than the monolithic despotism described in Greek sources. These revisionist approaches emphasize Persian administrative sophistication, religious diversity, and cultural achievements that rivaled or exceeded contemporary Greek developments. Academic debates continue regarding numerous aspects of the Mountain Gateway defense. Military historians question whether the narrow pass actually neutralized Persian numerical superiority as effectively as traditional accounts suggest. Archaeologists debate the precise location of key engagement points. Classical scholars examine how much of Herodotus's account represents factual reporting versus literary embellishment or political agenda. These scholarly conversations demonstrate how the historic clash remains intellectually vital rather than merely ceremonially revered. The advent of graphic novels introduced the ancient battle to new generations through Frank Miller's 300, 1998, which consciously prioritized mythic resonance over historical accuracy. Miller's stark black and white illustrations and hypermasculine Spartans reinvigorated popular imagination while amplifying certain problematic aspects of the narrative, particularly its glorification of militarism and simplistic East-West dichotomies. Zack Snyder's 2007 film adaptation of Miller's work further expanded the battle's popular footprint. Utilizing revolutionary visual techniques and stylized combat sequences, the film achieved massive commercial success while sparking significant controversy. Critics noted its historical inaccuracies, Orientalist depiction of Persians, and potentially troubling political subtexts. Defenders countered that the film represented not historical documentary, but contemporary mythology, a dreamlike visualization of how Spartans might have conceptualized their own struggle. Iran, modern inheritor of Persian civilization, responded with particular objection to these depictions. Government spokespeople condemned the film as Western propaganda designed to dehumanize Persian Iranian culture in preparation for potential military conflict. This contemporary diplomatic tension demonstrated the continued potency of the ancient confrontation as more than mere historical curiosity. Beyond entertainment media, the legendary stand maintains presence in educational contexts worldwide. Military academies study the battle for tactical lessons about force multiplication through terrain advantage and the psychological impact of disciplined resistance. Leadership programs extract principles about commitment, preparation, and clarity of purpose. Ethics courses examine the moral dimensions of sacrifice and the complex relationship between individual and collective good. The battle's influence extends into unexpected domains. Business literature references the Thermopylae mindset when discussing organizational resilience against overwhelming competition. Sports psychology invokes Spartan discipline to inspire athletic performance. Even medical literature contains references to Thermopylae moments, situations where healthcare providers must make courageous stands against impossible odds with limited resources. Modern Greece maintains particularly complex relationships with the Hot Gates legacy. The battle features prominently in national education and cultural expression, providing historical foundation for Greek identity. Simultaneously, critical scholars within Greece question nationalistic appropriations that oversimplify the past or project contemporary political boundaries onto ancient cultural divisions. The battlefield itself now hosts approximately 100,000 visitors annually. Modern tourist facilities include a museum containing archaeological findings, educational displays, explaining the engagement's historical context, and monuments to both Greek and Persian participants. This emphasis on inclusive commemoration represents evolution from earlier periods when the site functioned primarily as nationalist shrine rather than historical educational resource. Militaries worldwide continue drawing inspiration from the famous Last Stand. Elite units adopt Spartan symbols or mottos referencing the battle. Training programs incorporate lessons about force multiplication through superior discipline and position. The United States Marine Corps particularly embraces this tradition, with some units explicitly modeling their ethos on Spartan martial values. Perhaps most fascinatingly, the Mountain Pass defense provides rhetorical framework for modern resistance movements globally. Environmental activists defending forests against development describe themselves as holding the pass. Indigenous communities resisting cultural assimilation invoke the Spartan example. Political dissidents facing authoritarian regimes find inspiration in the battle's central message that resistance, even when materially futile, carries moral victory through its very existence. Comparative historical analysis reveals the uniqueness of the stand at the Hot Gates among famous last stands. Unlike the Alamo, the defenders had no expectation of reinforcement. Unlike Masada, they chose offensive engagement rather than passive resistance. Unlike Custer's last stand, they entered battle with clear strategic purpose rather than tactical miscalculation. These distinctions help explain the battle's distinctive resonance. Its defenders exemplify not merely courage, but deliberate sacrifice for strategic purpose and higher principles. The continued vitality of the ancient confrontation in modern imagination suggests something beyond mere historical interest. The battle speaks to perennial human concerns about individual mortality versus collective survival, physical defeat versus moral victory, and the possibility of transcendent meaning through self-sacrifice. Until these fundamental questions cease troubling human consciousness, the ancient warriors at the narrow pass will likely retain their ability to inspire, challenge, and provoke across the vast gulf of centuries. The story of the historic stand concludes where it began, with fundamental questions about human nature, courage, and the meaning we create in the face of mortality. What transforms a military defeat into an immortal victory? Why does this ancient conflict continue to resonate across cultures and centuries? The answers lie not merely in the battle's tactical elements, but in its embodiment of timeless human truths. Perhaps most profound among the lessons of the Hot Gates is the revelation that defeat and victory transcend immediate material outcomes. By conventional metrics, the battle represents unambiguous Persian triumph. They achieved their objective of clearing the pass and continued their advance into central Greece. Yet history remembers the mountain defense as a Greek victory of sorts, a moral conquest that laid essential groundwork for eventual strategic success. This paradox challenges our binary understanding of success and failure, suggesting that deeper currents of meaning flow beneath surface outcomes. The battle also illuminates the complex relationship between individual and community. The Spartans who fell at the narrow pass did not die for personal glory, but for the survival of their society. Their example forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about modern individualism. Have we lost something essential in our elevation of personal fulfillment above communal responsibility? Might there be circumstances where the voluntary surrender of individual life serves higher purpose? These questions, while potentially troubling to contemporary sensibilities, remain vital for any society seeking balance between individual rights and collective welfare. The legendary Last Stand speaks with particular eloquence about preparation for adversity. The Spartans' extraordinary performance did not materialize spontaneously, but resulted from lifelong conditioning, physical, psychological, and moral. Their society committed extraordinary resources to developing warriors capable of such discipline, precisely because they recognized that crisis reveals character rather than creating it. This insight challenges the comfortable assumption that untested virtue will naturally manifest when circumstances demand it. Even as we admire Spartan courage, we must acknowledge the uncomfortable complexity of their society. The same cultural system that produced the 300 also depended on helot slavery, practiced infanticide of defective newborns, and subordinated individual fulfillment to state needs. This tension between admiring particular virtues while recognizing the problematic context from which they emerged demands nuanced historical judgment rather than simplistic hero worship or cynical dismissal. The Persian perspective offers equally valuable reflection. Xerxes' campaign represented neither irrational aggression nor cartoonish villainy, but the legitimate strategic interests of a sophisticated civilization. Persian imperial administration often proved more tolerant of local customs and religions than contemporary Greek governance. Their forces included many who believed sincerely in their cause and displayed courage comparable to their opponents. This recognition does not diminish Greek heroism, but rather humanizes the conflict, preventing its reduction to simplistic moral binaries. Leadership emerges as another central theme in the narrative of the Mountain Gateway. Leonidas exemplified what Greeks called kailokagathia, the harmonious combination of physical excellence and moral virtue. Unlike distant commanders who preserve themselves while sacrificing subordinates, he shared every danger with his men. Yet leadership manifested at multiple levels throughout the Greek ranks. Dianerches maintaining morale through humor, unnamed file leaders holding formation when instinct urged retreat, individual warriors supporting comrades despite their own wounds. This distributed courage reminds us that leadership functions through example rather than merely through authority. The geological context of the coastal defile contains its own metaphorical significance. The battlefield no longer exists as it did in 480 BC. Coastline changes have transformed the narrow pass into an open plain. This physical evolution mirrors how historical memory itself shifts with time. Each generation encounters the famous battle, not directly, but through accumulated layers of interpretation, adapting its meaning to contemporary concerns while maintaining connection to an essential core. Religious dimensions of the confrontation invite particular attention. Before departing for the fateful pass, Leonidas consulted the Delphic oracle and received prophecy that either Sparta would fall or lose a king of Heracles' line. This framework positioned his sacrifice within religious context, not merely tactical necessity, but fulfillment of divine requirement. Even for secular modern audiences, this aspect illuminates how transcendent meaning structures human action, particularly when facing mortality. The central paradox of the Greek defense remains its most powerful legacy, that defeat, consciously accepted for sufficient cause, can achieve more than victory purchased through compromise of principle. The Greeks who fell at the mountain corridor lost their lives, but preserved something more valuable: their conception of what made life worth living in the first place. This seeming contradiction contains profound wisdom about human dignity and the ultimate sources of meaning. In our turbulent age, where certainties dissolve and traditional values face constant challenge, the Spartan stand offers rare fixed point for orientation, not because its lessons provide simple answers to complex questions, but because it reminds us that certain human experiences, courage, sacrifice, loyalty, principle, transcend historical particularity. The Spartans who combed their hair before meeting death, the Thespians who volunteered to remain when they might have withdrawn, even the Persian warriors who charged repeatedly into the hot gates despite witnessing their comrades' fate, all testify to capacities for transcendence embedded within our shared humanity. Perhaps most valuable for contemporary audiences is the battle's fundamental message about resistance itself. When Leonidas was commanded to lay down his arms, he responded with the laconic phrase, "Mollen lebe," come and take them. This defiance against overwhelming power contains seeds of all human liberation struggles. It reminds us that while physical subjugation may sometimes prove unavoidable, internal surrender remains always a choice. Freedom exists not merely as absence of constraint, but as presence of will. The enduring resonance of the mountain pass defense suggests something essential about how humans construct meaning from mortality. We are, uniquely among creatures, aware of our inevitable end. This awareness could paralyze us with despair or hedonism, living desperately before darkness descends. Yet throughout history, humans have discovered another possibility: that conscious acceptance of death for sufficient cause transforms finite existence into meaningful participation in something larger than individual life. This transformation occurred at the Hot Gates. A military engagement lasting mere days somehow transcended its immediate context to become touchstone for human aspiration across millennia. The legendary stand reminds us that physical courage, while admirable, matters less than moral courage. The capacity to face unpleasant truth and act according to principle rather than expedience or self-preservation. As our journey through this ancient story concludes, we return to the stark mountainside where it unfolded. Though centuries have passed and the physical landscape has changed, something eternal remains in that narrow pass between mountain and sea. There, for a brief moment in the vast expanse of time, a small band of warriors demonstrated what humans can become when inspired by liberty, bound by brotherhood, and guided by laws they deem worthy of the ultimate sacrifice. Their example echoes still across oceans and ages, reminding us that in our own confrontations with overwhelming odds, whether physical threats, moral challenges, or spiritual doubts, we too might find within ourselves the capacity for transcendent courage, not because we are Spartans, but because we share with them the essential human condition. Mortal creatures capable of immortal deeds, finite beings touched by infinite aspirations, dust that dreams of stars.